Hi, it's Clark on Temptress. Today we're going to talk about how to make the perfect dinghy painter. If you don't know what's important in a dinghy painter, or you don't know what a dinghy painter is, this is the video for you. First off, what's a dinghy painter? A dinghy painter is the rope that ties to the front end of a small boat, a dinghy. And it has a lot of jobs. You use it to tie it up when you come into a dock, you tie to a cleat or tie to the dock or whatever. You use it when you need to tie it to the mothership, either to bring it alongside, unload your groceries, or just to tow it if you're out at sea. And very often that same piece of line is used with an anchor at the other end to anchor the dinghy. So we're looking for a dinghy painter, that piece of line, that meets certain criteria that solves all those problems. And up till now, I haven't found the perfect dinghy painter. So what I'm going to do today is make it. We're going to make our own rope. Let's talk about the criteria. So a dinghy painter needs to be strong and reliable. I mean, it's got to be strong enough it's not going to break. And it's got to be pretty seriously strong, because you might think of it as how I tie my dinghy up, in a nice calm bay like this. But I tell you, a day will come when it's blowing 50 and the dinghy's half full of water and the waves are 7 foot coming through the anchorage and the dinghy is jerking on the yacht, and you don't want to lose the dinghy for lots of reasons. Also, you might be towing with this and it can get real rough out there. And things could go wrong, like the dinghy could take on water and you're really pulling a huge load. So you want this dinghy painter to be strong and to stay strong throughout its life. It's also important that this line can hold a knot. There's ropes in the world that hold great knots, and there's ropes that are kind of slippery, and no matter what you do, the knot will just pull out. That's not really great, because you're going to be tying a knot in this thing and untying it an awful lot. This piece of line is going to be hooked to your dinghy and be exposed to like the tropical sun if you're out here cruising for years and years and years. So it has to be somewhat resistant to the sun. Now, no plastic is really well resistant to the sun, and all the non-synthetic lines will rot from like biology. So plastics are better, but we want one that's pretty good with the sun. A dinghy painter needs to be able to absorb energy. Some lines are like, if it was a steel cable, it would just go boing when a load comes onto it. And that's really bad. You want something that can stretch a little bit. The boing situation means all that energy has to very abruptly be absorbed somewhere. And it'll either rip something off the deck of the boat, what it's tied to, or at least harm it. It could pull the attachment point off the dinghy, or it could destroy the clips involved. I've had all of that happen. You really need some energy absorption in this system. Finally, this line needs to float. There's a lot of materials like nylon that would meet all of those requirements, except it just sinks down into the water column. Why it needs to float is because if it's floating, it basically can't get in mischief with things below the waterline. Those mischief things are the yacht's propeller, number one. You come into a bay, you start letting the boat go backwards, as you're anchoring, something goes wrong, you put the transmission into gear to do a little maneuvering, and unbeknownst to you, your dinghy painter has gotten itself near the propeller, chug, chug, chug. Next thing you know, the yacht's on the beach because you can't maneuver anymore. This is just so important. So if the line floats, it's virtually impossible to get down to where the propeller is. So it's safe. You can back right onto it. It'll just get bulldozed on the surface. It'll be great. So a line needs to float. It also needs to float so it doesn't get in the dinghy's propeller, because that's out there sometime too with the line in the water. And finally, something that people don't think about. But if you take that dinghy out to a reef someplace and you want to dive on this beautiful reef with all these lovely coral, you can usually find a small sand spot. And particularly if you grab the anchor and physically dive down, you're going to go swimming anyway, right? And you put it into that nice sand, that's great. But you want the anchor line to generally float to the surface and go to the dinghy, not lie across the bottom and go to the dinghy, because it's going to start getting snagged on coral. Partly, it's going to harm itself because coral's sharp. but partly it's going to destroy the coral, and then the next person doesn't get the nice view. So a floating line is very important for that as well. So the two materials I'm going to talk about today, because we're going to kind of make a hybrid of them, but is polypropylene and dyneema. Polypropylene is probably one of the weaker fibers we use in the marine industry. That's usually not a problem because it's also one of the cheaper fibers, so you just get a bigger one and you're fine with it. But the other end of it is it really doesn't like sun exposure, and its effect is it makes it weaker. You see this stuff break a lot when it's old. Also, when it starts to break, it's just nasty on your hands because it's like lots of little splinters. Dyneema is crazy strong. People replace the yacht's rigging. They take the stainless steel down and re-rig their boat with dyneema. Now, I'm not a fan of that because like knives exist, and if you ever make somebody that owns knife technology upset with you, the vandalism is just too easy. But it is strong as hell, and it really doesn't stretch much. We'll get to that in a minute. So dyneema also is really good in the sun. This particular piece of line isn't new. This has been the dinghy painter on Temptress for 5 years in the tropical sun, and you can look at it. It's in great shape. It doesn't look like it looks like the day I bought it with a little bit of fuzz from rubbing on things. So it's tough, it's strong, it's just amazing. Also, we talked about price of this. This is like the cheapest stuff in the world. This kind of is too for a weird reason. This particular line costs less than $20 for 50 feet. And why that is I'll put the link down in the description, but you find this being sold as a replacement line for winches, for small winches, like ATV winches. It's as strong as the 1/4 inch line that it was, they're replacing. Easier to work with, you don't worry about it kinking or anything. It's really superior. But because they sell so many of them in competition, it's cheap as dirt. So 18 bucks, you can get one of these. Okay? This is terrible with knots. You tie a good bowline with this and shake it a little bit, you can pull it right free. It's just slippery as can be. This is great with knots. It holds, feels good in the hand, slides just enough that you can untie the knot. It's probably one of my favorite lines to actually tie knots and feel good about. I did mention this guy has really bad shock absorption. He's just so crazy strong that when you put a huge load of a dinghy on, this is like, it doesn't even wake up. It's like 1% of its strength. This stuff is pretty good absorbing shock because you're kind of closer to its maximum strength, at a reasonable size. So that's like the biggest problem with dyneema. It just is too strong, and we're going to try to fix that. This is supposed to float. I bought this line because I looked up the density of things. The density of seawater is 1.03 grams per cc. The density of this is actually ultra high molecular weight polyethylene. This is, I think it's like 0.98 grams per cc. This is 0.9 grams per cc. So this is much less dense. In other words, much more floaty than this is. It turns out when you put this in salt water for a couple of years, you get like all these little micro growths, little, barnacle-y things. They're not sharp though, so I don't think they're barnacles, but whatever. The growth has a higher density than the seawater, and it's enough to pull this line underwater, and it no longer floats. So we're going to try to fix that problem. So what I want to do today, and it's an experiment for me, I haven't done this before, but I want to make a hybrid of this and this. The simplest reason for that is if I can put them together, this guy becomes like a life jacket for this guy, right? So he's going to help him float. Now, since the fibers of this are still there, it's as strong as this was. And since I'm going to put this inside of this, this will protect this from the sun. Remember, this guy doesn't do well in the sun. This guy does great in the sun. This is going to be what we see on the outside, so it's going to hold knots as well as this does alone. This guy's probably number one failure is the fact that it just comes up short with no shock absorption. I've had shackles, not this exact shackle, but a stainless steel shackle on this line in a nasty situation, and the next morning my dinghy was gone, and when I pulled the line up, I broke the stainless steel just like hitting it with a hammer repeatedly. You need to have a buffer to take care of this. Well, if you were to look at this line a little more careful, you see that it's what we call hollow braid. There's 12 strands of line, and it's hollow on the inside. There's a path right down the middle. So what I'm going to do is put this line inside of that line. Now, if you notice, to make it wider in the center, I push it together. I'm making the line shorter to have a line on the inside. What happens there is if I pull it with a jerk, it tries to squeeze what's inside. So the energy in the system gets dissipated by squeezing the polypropylene. It's not a lot of squeeze per inch, but we're going to have 50 feet of it here. And in 30, 50 feet of it, there's going to be a significant stretch. I'm counting on that anyway. We're going to find out if I'm right. Finally, flotation. As I mentioned, this is just going to be a life jacket for this. If they're together, their density is going to be closer to the polypropylene end of things, and I'm hoping that it's going to maintain its flotation for a long time. So let's get at it. This is how you tie a long-term knot, as it were. This is a Bremel, and it's a splice that is probably the easiest damn splice in the world put in. Emily, I think, put this very one in. She'd put a splice in a video, so it'll be that video there if you want to learn how to do this. I'm not going to go into detail on it. Right now I'm just going to pull it out, and pulling it out you'll kind of get to see how it was made. But kind of the line is kind of spliced through the line. I should have brought my FID, but we got it. I almost used my teeth, but that would look unprofessional. Or super professional. Sailors, after all. Oops. Yeah, let's talk about this. This particular line comes with this little piece of anti-chafe, and I moved it to a place where there's rubbing on the yacht. But it's going to be in our way, and actually it's kind of telling. If you look at this line, well, once I take it off, we'll see it more, but you can see we've chewed through the anti-chafe layer. I'm going to not cut the line, but take off these whippings. And if you want to know how to do a whipping, there's a video on that on our channel. Now, if we look at the worst spot of chafe, there are a few little failures here, but this was going around a shackle like this. I did a little shock absorber trick in storms and stuff for like 3 years. I think it held up amazingly well. Now, I'm going to put this inside of here. I actually have some fancy splicing tools. There's one by a guy named Brian Toss I really like, but since you probably don't have one, and I think this is going to be, maybe it's famous last words, but I think this is going to be relatively easy. I'm going to do this just with tape. So I'm going to tape the end of this line kind of with a little spiral tight. And why I'm doing this is I want it to be like a needle that I can push through. And I don't want it to become unwound, unsplied, unroped. And polypropylene usually comes with the end burnt, and that's just going to be a big nub. So I'm going to cut that part off. And now I've got a little needle to run through the dyneema. Okay, so I'm going to open the dyneema up, and particularly when you first start, you want to be careful not to go through one of the yarns. You want to go between everything. And then when you go up the inside, you don't want to snag anything. You want it to go right through the passage that's on the inside. And I think had I gotten a FID, my life would be easier. But let's see how it goes. No, it's going to be too hard. I'm going to get a FID and do this with a FID. Okay, I went down below and I grabbed this. This is the splicing wand, I believe it's called, by a guy named Brian Toss. He died a while ago, but he's got a great book. I learned so much, and I think this is one of the greatest tools for splicing. There's 100 different splice FIDs, and I go for this one first all the time. Anyway, if that's interesting, if you go down to our Amazon store, we've marked it. Anyway, you'll get the idea. I'm putting this into the line, and I'm opening the line up and putting it over the fid. Now, if I push the line on itself, it opens up like that, and I just push it onto the fid, you know, just like this. And I'm really trying not to catch the internal strands, which is doubly hard when I'm doing things on video. But I'll get this. Anyway, we're going to probably jump fast forward. Nope, I went too far. There we go. Okay. Took me a while to get the hang of this, but once you get the hang of it, it moves right along. Famous last words, and I have trouble. That's as far as I'm going to go because it's going to be a splice. So again, you come out, and then I'm going to ignore what I did with the tape because that's now silly. Cut off the line, and this lets me push a little stainless steel wire, little lasso through, and I put my other line into that little lasso, and then when I pull the lasso back, it kind of locks it right off in there like that, and then it's a matter of just doing this, and I pulled the new line into the big line, and I'll show you what happens here. The line is a little bigger than it was before. I can compare it, but not a lot. You can see that you see none of the polypropylene really. It's being very well protected from the sun. And it's ever so slightly shorter too, because that's part of coming together. So to get long again, which is what it would want to do if we jerked on it, it has to squeeze what's inside. So we built this system. Now I just have to repeat. So I'm gonna grab another hunk of rope and put the fid through and then pull the line through and do that for 50 feet. So I'll see you in a bit. All right, I did that. I ended up putting the polypropylene into about 30 feet of the dyneema. And of course, there's a difference. This is the diameter of the dyneema alone, and now it's a little bigger. And in getting bigger, it got shorter. So what happened in 30 feet of putting this line inside, I lost about 8 feet when I measured it. That's good. It's exactly what I want. So for it to go out those 8 feet, it would have to squish this to nothing, which isn't going to happen. But some squishing will happen, and it should have some shock absorption. So what's next? I need to put a splice and splice this in. I won't bore you with that because we have another video Emily put up, and you can go and check that out. So I'll do that in my own time. And the final thing is, does this work? So you've watched the whole video with me. I thank you very much. I think I'm going to put this video up even if I'm a failure. But if I'm right by my theory, I throw this in the ocean, it's going to float. And it's going to float well. And I will put in the description in a month or so if it's still floating, once it gets growth in it. And so read that before you put your effort into all this process. But if it says down below, still floating 2 months later, or ask me in the comments if I forget, I think this is going to be a good plan for the perfect dinghy painter. Well, here goes. Floats like a cork. I think this is going to be the best dinghy painter ever made by man. Like I said, check the description, find out if I still think that way in a couple months. But I think it ticks all the boxes. It is pretty impervious to sunlight, based on the fact that this one's been out in the sun for 5 years. It's strong as hell, it's dyneema. It holds a knot well, again, dyneema. It floats, which is absolutely vital in a dinghy painter. Don't be using all Dacron Genoa sheets and stuff to tie your dinghy up. It's a bad idea. I forget what else, but I think it meets everything that we need it to be. So thanks for watching the video. I'll see you in later videos. Tell me if you have become absolutely sick of me doing battery related videos and you want to see more of this rigging stuff. Bye from Temptress.